If you look at what Warren Buffett's saying, they're pretty cautious on the banking sector. Now, I'm sure you guys will be wondering, okay, what in the world does this have to do with the San Francisco situation, the San Francisco real estate situation? Well, just you wait, because Buffett is actually a pretty good investor. You may be like, oh, he's slow, he doesn't make that much money, but he's so consistent at making money. That's why he's like the richest investor out there, right? Billions and billions of dollars. And he bought oil when it was super low, and now oil is at 2023 highs. That's pretty impressive. And now he's still saying that you better be very cautious of the banking industry. In fact, Buffett has not bought any banking stocks and even sold many of the banking stocks. There's even a bunch of private jets going to Omaha to meet him to ask him to please start buying small regional banks, which Buffett said no. He didn't buy a single share of regional banks. And that's what's going on. So here's what's happening in San Francisco, because banks are getting really scared. You even have guys like First Republic who may actually go underwater in the next few years simply because the climate of the business world is changing. Here in the US, commercial real estate is basically worthless. It's very different from other cities where commercial real estate is still decently hot. The online culture here in America is absolutely crazy. We're also seeing many of these big companies moving out of places like San Francisco and just going elsewhere, right? And San Francisco has billions and billions of very expensive loans that the banks want back. And if you go default and have the building go down 50 to 70% in value, which is exactly what's going on now, banks are really, really sweating right now because there's several banks in the US, in my opinion, probably 30 to 40 banks in the California region that have huge loans in the Bay Area real estate department. There's about 4,000 banks in the US, but hey, if 30 to 40 fail, it's still devastating. First Republic, on the other hand, was the 14th largest bank in the country, holding a massive position and also a big lender for consumer and commercial real estate, which is very scary. And this is one of those banks that people saw were too big to fail. But it's not just going to be First Republic that has these huge commercial real estate loans. We're going to be also having a lot of other banks. Banks that are ranked 30, ranked 100, ranked 200. Small regional banks that probably loaned out like 5 different skyscrapers in San Francisco. Many of these lenders are facing some of the biggest beatings. Some banks are just one-trick ponies. They only do commercial real estate lending. And some banks only do residential. But San Francisco, no doubt, has some of the most expensive office buildings in the world before the pandemic. But now, many of these office buildings are going bust. You're going to be seeing some of the most expensive skyscrapers in San Francisco selling for 40, 50, even 75% off. I've seen several of these buildings selling for cheap. Even the Trans-American Bay building, right? This is a high-end area, and the areas around the building, several of these skyscrapers are selling for 50 to 75% off. Recently, Wells Fargo sold their building for a super cheap price, and they bought that building all the way back in 2005, and they bought it for $108 million. Now they sold it for $40 million. You're telling me almost 2 decades of price appreciation and you still sold for a 60% loss? And that's exactly what's happening in the Bay Area. So people are really freaked out about it, right? Many of these bankers and small regional banks are really scared about the situation because you got malls, big towers, skyscrapers, massive expensive renovation fees, big construction projects that are going for closure. And it's happening in many of the U.S. cities, but nothing as bad as San Francisco, because San Francisco's vacancies are hitting near 40%, whereas Seattle's 15, Manhattan's 10 to 12. They're pretty bad, but not like San Francisco bad. I mean, office vacancies are rising. We're also seeing buildings where it's leased out, but there's no office workers. This is why 150,000 office workers no longer come back to San Francisco. And every single quarter, you always get almost double-digit percentage gains in terms of vacancies. And many of these buildings are pretty much worthless because the expenses are high, real estate taxes are extremely high, and also the building can't be leased out, right? You're already seeing some of the fattest and biggest construction projects being canceled, like Hayes Point and One Oak, 2 massive skyscraper projects that are being canceled in the Bay Area because everyone has noticed that why build an expensive skyscraper when you could just buy a foreclosed building for pennies on the dollar. And this is happening, right? The real estate bubble burst from the streets of San Francisco is real. The city's new landmarks are struggling. The office buildings and shopping malls are losing tenants. You have the most iconic shopping mall in San Francisco, Westfield, shutting down. I couldn't imagine right? Westfield shutting down. Nobody thought that would ever happen, but apparently the vacancies were 50%, despite it being a number one tier mall. This is a high-end mall, right? You got Bloomingdale's, you got Nordstrom Rack, which have all closed. This place, which used to be very vibrant, filled with stores, is now vacant. Many of the hottest retail space underneath these buildings are empty. You're seeing a bunch of tents, homeless people everywhere in this area, and this is not a place where you want to raise a family and live in. San Francisco is truly and slowly becoming a massive dump. And if you look around, these real estate buildings that you see are basically worthless. And guess what happened to the massive Westfield Mall? They just gave it back to the lender. If you look around, you see this massive building here, which is Park 55 Hotels. They defaulted on $700-ish million loan. They said that the reason why they're not paying is, one, there's no tourists. Most of the rooms are empty, and most importantly, the building isn't even worth half of the debt. So the debt was $700-ish million, right? That's their mortgage. They pretty much said that the building wasn't even worth $300 million. So they just straight up give it back to the bank, and the bank doesn't want this at all. Why the bank want this? The bank wants money, not like a worthless empty building which has property tax and other expenses on it. And this is causing this massive decrease in the trust of regional banks. Many people are very scared, and right now there's still money outflowing from regional banks to bigger banks because the commercial real estate is very scary. And back to Buffett and Munger have both said that the reason why these regional banks are just so dangerous to buy is because of bad commercial loans. During the pandemic and even slightly before, there's just an over construction of these office buildings. Too many of these office buildings, right? Just way too many. This is causing this massive headache in the real estate department. And residential, it's kind of fine. I think residential usually does pretty well. Even in San Francisco, residential, though prices are falling down, they're not going down like 70%. Office real estate is. And you may be wondering, oh, why can't banks just get these office buildings back and they could just turn it to residential? That would be good, right? I mean, it sounds good, but like, you want to turn an office to residential. One, you got to see if the office is compatible. Two, you also got to see if the city approves you. And lastly, it's going to cost almost $1,000 per square feet to renovate an office to residential, which alone is already very expensive. And that'll put it in the super luxury class, which in San Francisco, there is no demand. Same thing in many California cities like Los Angeles. Luxury properties are in no demand, right? It's zero demand. You got high interest rates. You know, this is absolutely going to destroy the banking industry, especially the regional ones. We don't know if we could ever recover from this. This isn't like 2008 where everything just comes crashing down. I think this is going to be a slow and steady crash of a few banks here and there from the commercial sector, especially the San Francisco sector, in the next few years. So just be careful in the market, guys. Like, seriously, you have a lot of people now being very worried about the commercial real estate situation in San Francisco because it's not good at all.